Hello and welcome to JPZilla. Okay, I know that Monarch Legacy of Monsters is kind of old news by now, but I just wanted to talk about it anyway. That's a bit of a lie. I don't want to talk about it. I want to talk about what it could have been, which is something a lot more fascinating in my opinion and a lot more character and monster driven. With that premise, let's get started. Before I talk about what I think the Monarch show should have been, let's talk about what it was and why it sucked. The obvious reason is that, in spite of the fact that it was marketed as a Godzilla show, with Godzilla showing up on the cover art, in spite of his absence from the title, Godzilla barely gets 3 minutes in its roughly 8-hour runtime. However, the show could have still pulled this off if it managed the character end of the story well. They didn't. They were less characters than paper cutouts and stereotypes. Kate is epitomized by her feelings of trauma, guilt, and bafflement, and never really seems to veer off that script. She never evolves in any meaningful way, as a character should. Kentaro started off fine, then somehow became the third wheel in his own quest to find his dad. And speaking of Mei, she was another cardboard cutout stereotype who never seemed to evolve either. Always complaining, but for some inexplicable reason stuck around when she had no reason to be there. She had no character development and didn't even prove helpful, so why is she even here? The third reason the show sucked is that it tied its own hands. It set itself in a time where, canonically, nothing much happens. Between 2014 and 2019, Godzilla just doesn't show up, as is said in King of the Monsters. Setting this show in any other time frame would have just been better than 2015. For instance, setting it in the time period where Ghidorah woke up all the Titans. That is just one idea though. Well, we've established that Monarch Legacy of Monsters sucks, and just why it sucks. Now, how could it have been better? Firstly, they had a great thing going with the 50s story arc in Monarch, and they really should have just focused on that for their first season instead of cutting to an uncompelling story arc in the slightly more modern day. I think that would have made for an amazing season 1. What I would change is that the 50s storyline would now be shown in chronological order, and I would have cut out the Axis Mundi altogether. As we already have the Hollow Earth, do we really need another one? I feel like it just kind of convolutes the whole Hollow Earth plot. Meaning that Keika would have died instead of pulling a modern cinema, which refuses to kill any character. The second season is where things would start to heat up though. Remember how I said that the Monsterverse has a lot of unused potential? Well, I would use it. The first thing to keep in mind is that we should pick a character who is allowed to make an impact in the Monsterverse, unlike Kate, Kentaro, Mei, and Tim, and who made more of an impact than Dr. Serizawa himself. I would set a show about Dr. Serizawa in the time period of pre-2014, because post-2014 is kind of a boring period, and after 2019, well, let's just say there'd be quite a problem using Dr. Serizawa in the Monsterverse. So we really can't explore the 2019 period of the Monsterverse with this character. I would set the show beginning right at the very end of the comic Godzilla Awakening. Here we see that Dr. Serizawa has just buried his father, a first-generation founder of Monarch, who, if I wrote it, would have been present in Season 1 in some form or another. And an older Shaw, yes, the one from Monarch Legacy of Monsters, comes up to him to recruit him into the Monarch Initiative. From this scene, taken straight from Godzilla Awakening, would be where we kick off our new Monarch Legacy of Monsters show. In this, we get to see a young Dr. Serizawa going on hair-raising expeditions to remote areas to learn more about the Titans who inhabit said areas. Areas like Skull Island, which are isolated from society but teeming with megafauna. One such place would be Monster Island, where Serizawa would discover a legendary amphibian monster with mysterious bioelectric powers named Titanus Gabra, which would foreshadow Ghidorah. For those of you Godzilla fans paying attention, you know that Gabra is a classic Godzilla monster from a somewhat hated movie. And this is just one example of how classic Toho monsters could be used effectively in such a series. But even if Legendary didn't want to shell out all that money just to get the licensing rights for Gabra of all creatures, they could still create their own interesting monsters, as shown with the Scar King and Shimo. Just please don't make it as boring as the Ion Dragon, whom they didn't even bother to give a proper name. Throughout the series, Serizawa would begin to feel the pressure of trying to hide the existence of 300-foot tall creatures from the general public, living up to his father's reputation, connecting with Godzilla, and fighting against the rising anti-Titan faction within Monarch, while learning about the threat that could literally destroy the human race through the parasitic Mutos, who would serve to be something of primary antagonists throughout the show. To elaborate further on the kind of atmosphere I'd want from this show, I would like this show to be a lot like the Japanese Ultraman, but without the giant alien. Serizawa would have his own motley crew with plenty of personality, like the Special Science Search Party from Ultraman. They would discover a new hidden ecosystem with new monsters every week, like the Ultraman show, and they would have to use their wit to come up with a monster extermination or containment plan. Again, just like Ultraman. Season 3, however, would get even more interesting than the previous two. To give you a hint of what's to come, the title would be changed to Apex Legacy of Monsters. This season would focus on Ren Serizawa, Dr. Serizawa's son. If you don't recognize the name, I don't really blame you, but it's this guy from Godzilla vs. Kong. Yeah, the guy who built Mechagodzilla is Serizawa's son. For some context, the novelization of Godzilla vs. Kong talks a lot more about his character. He was somewhat neglected by Dr. Serizawa, who always seemed to put Godzilla before his own son. So Ren grew to resent Godzilla as the older brother who stole his father's affection. This would prompt him to develop Mechagodzilla to kill Godzilla. I would incorporate his story into Season 3. Here, he joins Monarch in an effort to live up to his family, in particular his father's, expectations, and joins the same conflict in trying to fill his father's shoes, the same conflict that his own father faced when he first joined Monarch. The difference is that, after seeing all the devastation that the Titans caused between the lives lost in the Skull Island expeditions, Godzilla's fight with the Mutos in San Francisco, with Muto Prime later on, with Ghidorah, and etc., Ren begins to see the Titans as true monsters, and his suppressed resentment at being pushed aside by his father for a Titan begins to resurface when he realizes just how unworthy the Titans are of his father's affections. Here he offers his services to Apex Cybernetics, and promises that he can find them a way to kill Godzilla. From here, the show would be about Ren's trial and error as he develops several Titan-killing mechs, perhaps including several classic Toho mechs like Mechany Kong. Of course, these mechs do great against chumps like Behemoth, but Godzilla always gets in the way, further fueling Ren's hatred and resentment. This show would actually bleed into Godzilla vs. Kong, showing the development of Mechagodzilla, and his various testing of the mech, this time from his perspective. The final episode, I think, would show how the Hollow Earth energy would awaken Ghidorah's slumbering conscious, how that conscious would meld with Ren's, as described in the novelization, and how Ren essentially became Mechagodzilla. I think it would be really cool to actually see the Godzilla vs. Kong vs. Mechagodzilla fight from Mechagodzilla's perspective, and such a show could perhaps offer us that. Lastly, I would reveal that Ren is still alive, in a way. His consciousness and Ghidorah's have merged to become something truly terrifying, something new that walks the earth in Ren's body. Technically, this would mean that we'd get our first humanoid alien, or alien hybrid, as Ghidorah is an alien, so maybe he could serve to kick off the Monster vs. Ultraman show, or, more likely, a Pacific Rim crossover in some way. Let me know if you'd like to see that in the comments down below. Well, that's my thoughts on what Monarch could have been, but what do you think? Do you think this would have been miles better than what we ended up getting, or do you think the original Monarch show was better than the one I present here? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.